and she's going to be with us in a few moments. So the goal of this event is to exchange views, opinions, ideas about the European identity wallet, the European digital identity wallet, and see if we are in favor of it, if we are against of it, or if, we are welcoming, we are, hi Eva. And we are going to discuss if we are in favor of it or against of it, what is going to be the world and the European world with the digital identity, if the digital identity is the same as the traditional identity we know, and how, as citizens, we are going to be part of this new digital world, if our rights are going to be more easily exercised, and what are the risks. And of course, we are going to discuss this all in the framework of the new regulation, which is now being discussed as an amendment of the old regulation, of the existing regulation 910 of 2014 about the electronic authentication and trust services. So I don't know if you want to make the opening remarks, Eva?
I might start.
Of course.
All of you, and just mentioning that we are now in the European Parliament preparing to have a final discussion and legislation on the European identity, a digital identity, a possibility to have a common platform to recognize identities, which is not, it's something that maybe we are more familiar to with using the COVID pass that was recognized across borders, but it was not really what Europe had already succeeded. So we have a passport recognized, but not really a European identity. Let me thank you for coming today. We are having a discussion on something that I think is really interesting under the light also of the digital transformation. We talk, I don't know if you heard about the metaverse. It's like gamifying online economy, the digital economy. Imagine you are like in a game where you can have yourself being at a conference, your avatar, you don't really need to be there, or having transactions online with your bank, or like shopping online in a 3D reality that's right, becoming more and more interesting. And you can have different avatars, different identities there. You can be able to revoke or allow for entities or people to see specific parts of your identity. So the challenges are incredible. Imagine your identity connected to your credit card. This is an identity for your transactions or for your health data, another identity, different access possibilities. And in a world where actually there are no real geographical borders, we talk about actually a global identity. So this would be a cornerstone for European policies and the digital transformation. I cannot exaggerate when I talk about online transactions. We all realized after the lockdown, we needed to move very fast to be able to use all the online services. We couldn't leave our houses, and the banks need to adjust, and more services like on blockchain arrived, more solutions there. So our digital identities not being completed online was a challenge to overcome. So now we have also a legal structure for that. And this is the situation of the revision that we have in the European Digital Identity Framework Regulation. So a set of rules basically for people online and what kind of data it will carry. It complements the Digital Euro program. This means a lot of funding can come to achieve the infrastructure or to use this identity. And it's contributing also to our digital compass, the targets to lead in the digital era. It's quite ambitious. We want 80% of citizens to be able to have such an identity by 2030. I don't know if it's ambitious. It used to be ambitious. Now it seems like it's the new normal. And the regulation also complements the Interinstitutional Declaration on European Digital Rights and principles for the digital decade. So these are like basically the targets that Europe set, and they complete a European digital single market. And this is a cornerstone or even the basis for everything in education, in banking, in the industry. We're completing the Data Act, the Artificial Intelligence Act. I think we are basically and the fintech package is finishing, and cybersecurity is now on its way. So I believe in a year and a half, we're going to be able to say that we will just review and see if there are mistakes, if you have to complete this digital transformation. And for governance, as you understand, in public services, coming from Greece, most of you, we've seen how important it is to be able to register online and remove all the frictions there. So this would be it on my behalf, because we have excellent speakers, and I would like to first give the floor, and then I think Alexandros could take over. A legal policy officer from DG Connect. It's my favorite DG, I used to say, because Mr. Gren is responsible for communication networks, content, and technology. It's a DG that covers everything that Liz is like of my interest, that translates in the digital era. And he focuses more on the e-government, as we said, and trust, and he has a responsibility of the revision of this regulation, a legal background which is necessary in these regards, and also an entrepreneur himself, so he understands the challenges and the possibilities that this face. I read that he's also worked with French election insights and French media, so I think this is also very important coming from such a country, to share the light on how we can have a European framework in this regard. So thank you all for coming, and I'll give you immediately the floor as we have speakers with us.
Okay, thanks a lot for the introduction. I think thanks a lot also for framing. I think the electronic identity, and I think why identity and an electronic identity is important, and why it is necessary when we move more and more online in terms of accessing services, public and private. And I will just take a step back and sort of explain where we come from, just to properly understand what the revision of the so-called eIDAS regulation entails, and perhaps why some aspects of it is the way it is in the Commission proposal. So I think nationally, where I come from, I think where you come from, there is an abundance of the use of electronic identities. So I use an electronic identity with my bank, I use an electronic identity with my government. But when I cross a border, I can't use my electronic identity to access services online, neither public services nor private services. This was at least the way it looked like in Europe before 2014, when we adopted version, let's call it version 1.0 of the eIDAS regulation, which set out a system of interoperable national eIDs for access to online public services. So the idea was that whatever a member state did at national level, we created an interoperable layer and some governance rules that enable trust and acceptance of eIDs wherever they come from, as long as they fulfilled certain requirements in terms of security and level of assurance, and it could be accepted for access to online public services. Now, 2015 came, 16, 17, and 18, and 18 was the time when member states had to notify, not obligatory, but when they should notify if they so wanted to, a national means, a national eID scheme for cross-border access to online public services. A lot of things happened between 2014 and 2018, not least in 19 and 20 and 21 with the COVID. I think the conclusion was that eIDAS 1.0, providing access to online public services based on a federated model and the use of existing national means, whatever they were, were really not up for fight. So partly the system we had created didn't work. Partly technology had moved on in the sense that large global players started to enter the market or enter the scene, so to speak, providing identity possibilities, identity wallet possibilities, and the prospect of becoming, I think, de facto identity providers, relying on our data, so my identity, your identity, philosophically and also in reality, I think. Last week, two large players came forth with their wallets. We already had one. Now we have three. Just to illustrate that, not acting on providing European citizens with an eID that can be used cross-border, it's not the solution, because others would do it for us. So in this space, against the background of eIDAS 1.0, as well as the paradigm moving away from centralized governance of eID to more user-centric or self-sovereign. Somebody uses the term self-sovereign identities. We can always discuss what does it mean, the concept of self-sovereign identity. It has some, I think, technical connotations. It has some political connotations and some possible legal connotations. But for the purpose of this debate in eIDAS 2, I think we are really moving from a more centrally governed model in the eIDAS 1 to a self-sovereign universe with the eIDAS 2, let's say with some caveats of control. And the control element, I would say, or the trust element, or the trust anchor, so to speak, that is really at the core of eIDAS is a member state. So whereas we are proposing a concept of a European digital identity framework, it is not Europe who's issuing your identity or attesting to your identity. It's the role of the member state to, as they do today, issue your identity data from birth, from whatever practice is in the member state, to verify that I am me and attest to my name, my date of birth, and where I'm born, whenever required. So the European Digital Identity Framework has proposed a European Digital Identity Wallet as an eID means, like a bank eID, a token, or an app used at national level, under the full control of the user, so a user cross-border can be able to provide his or her identity credentials. Another shift from the eIDAS version 1.0 is also where the eIDAS 1.0 focused on a very narrow set of identity data. We refer to it as a minimum data set, meaning my first name, last name, my birth date. It said a minimum data set that should enable the identity of the person, to providing a framework for the provision of other identity attributes when required for the provision of services. But not least because it allows us to, or the user, to only provide the data which is strictly necessary for the provision of such services. In the public sector cross-border, you relied fully on a complete data set, a minimum data set. You had to provide it all. Okay, this is me, this is my data. You couldn't say, oh, here's me, it's verified by someone, and here's my birthday. It was the full data set. Now, with the advent of the European Digital Identity Wallet, issued by member states for purposes of having a trust anchor with the member state, and the possibility to provide, by means of a larger ecosystem of, we call it the provision of qualified or attestation of attributes, which is, call it a credential, for example, being a driver's license. It could be an attestation of my age instead of sending my birthday to someone. Someone can attest to the fact that I am more than 18, I'm more than 50, or I'm less than 70, typical when required to get a service. So it opens up sort of a completely new, in our view, I think, framework possibility for citizens not only to provide your identity, but provide it under your full control in sort of a new environment as compared to where we came from in eIDAS 1.0. So to just briefly, I think, summarize, I think the main points here is that there is simply no choice, I think, from a European perspective, an internal market perspective, not to do anything. In the absence of not dealing with it, issuing something which is based on European values, somebody else, I think, will step in and de facto provide solutions. And I think from a policy perspective, I think this is not where I think we would like to go.
Just to say that this is excellent, and there are great business opportunities that will build on top of what can be achieved if we have a common framework for digital identities and more providers there, because then it would allow a lot of services to take place with easier authentication and more trusted environment. So it's like a great opportunity because you're entering a market of 500 million people, so it's a lot, and we didn't achieve such a common infrastructure yet. And the duplication or fake identities, these problems can be solved with technology. We have blockchain technology. Daniel de Soil, Governor of European Self-Sovereign Identity Framework of the European Blockchain Partnership, very important, established also in the years where the member states, 30 actually, European states and related countries, of course, cooperated to establish that, to deliver cross-border digital public services with high standards of security and privacy. So blockchain is not just Bitcoin. It's a great infrastructure for security and privacy. So Daniel has been initiating and leading also in the national Belgian projects of blockchain and working on digital transformation in the city of Ghent, and also work with the Flemish government. So I think he's the best to talk about how in governance this solution would establish a whole new, era and possibilities. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm very thrilled to be here because this is indeed a very important debate. I think, like Andres has mentioned, this is one of the most important projects that Europe is facing on the digital decade. It's not about only identification, authentication, using an ID. It's about your digital me. How you control that digital me, how will the world look like, how will interact. I think the example that you gave about the meta, that is a reality that we are facing. How do we treat and how we will engage the identity goal? I think Europe is at the right moment to have the necessary ambitions to go into the digital area, to try to see how they will interact, to create a new European digital identity. But today I would like to raise 2 points, 2 important points that I miss a bit in this aspect. We see that the political ambitions are clear. We can't go to a more user-centric, some people even say self-sovereign identity aspect. We say that we also go to minimal data sets. So the political ambitions are good. But I see also that at a certain moment, people tend to see this as a natural evolution of current concepts and current technology. So what I fear and what I bring into the discussion as something provocative, my excuse, but it is that we could tend to be in place that we use the current solution, yesterday's technology, to decide on this future. And that would be, in my opinion, a big risk for Europe. That is one point I would like to raise in the discussion, that are we not needed to look at different solutions, real privacy-driven aspects that empowers real the citizens, so not only go into the direction of self-sovereign identity, decentralized aspect, but fully go in that direction. So try to see how we can really empower the citizen. That is a very important aspect because times has changed. We don't are in the situation where the first eIDAS came from. The world has changed. We have seen the drop of trust in society towards governments, people don't trust those kind of things. The COVID times have also given us some examples. For some people, they say, okay, we need to be more and more in control. So we need to be, as government, and I look at my situation in the Belgian government, provide other solutions that can also reinforce and regain the trust of citizens. So we need to bring up in the whole eIDAS aspect also new solutions that can regain that trust of citizens. So that's, I think, very important to look at. So not only a technological evolution, what are we used to that and how we can stand it, because the scope is much bigger than it's today. So in that view, I think new solutions, raising blockchain, but about self-sovereign identity is something that Europe really needs to look at. It's not something that will change from today to tomorrow, but we need to look at those new aspects, because that will be, in my opinion, the third way that Europe needs to look at. We have seen in the area of the identity big surveillance aspects from a commercial plate to a state aspect. So we need to find in Europe a third way that empowers the citizens, but can of course interact with e-commerce and with also of course the state aspects that are needed. So that's, I think, for my opinion, the best and very important discussion that we need to have. What kind of vision do we put a hand against that EU digital identity, and look at new concepts, not only go about what we know and what we really implement. Those are new times and need new solution. So that's one point. And the other point I would like to raise is we see the political ambition is clear, then it gets very soon translated towards a technical solution. But what about society? How do we see the discussion on this very important topic, how things will be going in society? What does this mean for me as a citizen? What can I do with this? Do I always I have control of those kind of things? So how we will interact and how citizens can be also an active partner in this discussion is very important. And I'm very happy with this initiative that will also, I think, help to start that society's discussion about how do we see the identity before implementing a real technology solution. Let's have also discussion about, okay, what are the rules that we want to see? How do we place the citizen aspect? So that's an aspect that we see, because government, national, regional government need to be very aware. We are not pushing things towards the citizen. We are trying to see how this will improve them in our European values, empower him. So my concern, I put it is, I think, how we can prevail the privacy from people, but also in the same way, of course, help them in digital interactions.
Do you think, Daniel, that citizens' rights are at stake here?
Potentially they are.
In what sense?
In what sense? One of the colleagues I really appreciate and really work with them has mentioned, one example, 𝐶 also is mentioned, if a gorilla, 800-pound gorilla asks you something, what will you do? You have a wallet and somebody asks you, big gorilla asks you, give me all your data. This is potentially possible in this kind of solutions. So if we don't go into systems that really protect the citizen, he'll be lost. He will give all his data away without any power. So it is not that straightforward. You have another power balance, so potentially you will get troubles. And we have also seen some credentials are very sensitive. So we need to see, can a user be protected against those kind of things? You give a user a lot of responsibility.
Get back to you with other questions later on, Daniel, in the discussion part. So maybe we could give the floor to the next speaker.
Yes. Also to say that Josh Crumb is with us, CEO of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Technologies and ELONtech advisor, and it's an honor to have you back actually post-COVID, because we did manage to work together even before. We had this transition to the digital economy and removing, several obstacles, trying to understand new technologies. Now we are at the stage that we try to understand how, with new technologies, we can provide real solutions to the problems we have. Mr. Crabb is a co-founder of Gold Money and served as a chief strategy officer also and director, but previously an executive director at Goldman Sachs, senior metal strategist at the Global Economics, Commodities and Strategy Research in London. He's worked a lot with the challenges of identity for the industry, and I think this is an aspect that it will give us enough enlightenment to see how we have to continue and which direction we should move. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, everyone, and good to be here. Good to be back. I'm probably, as a mining engineer, the last person you'd expect to be on a panel like this, but I guess I'm trying to provide an industry perspective. My primary business is we're launching a new commodity futures exchange regulated by the Monetary Authority of Singapore, focused on energy transition commodities. 3 years ago, we were focused on liquefied natural gas when most of the world didn't know what that is. Of course, unfortunately, we're all getting acutely aware of what liquefied natural gas is. So we've been building a market for better risk management there. But a big part of that is also we believe in carbon neutral commodities, carbon offset commodities. And we actually believe that digital identity and particularly an international recognition of identity systems in the transfer of digital title is very, very important. Commodities have always been very international, but with carbon credits and carbon offset to meet the goals of 2030 and 2050. We really are looking at one of the first sort of global titles because it's not a physical commodity. So how we manage the exchange of credits and the retirement of credits in a secure way actually absolutely requires digital identity. So that's probably the industry and the international perspective I wanted to bring to the table. We've been working on that, working in self-sovereign digital identity from a technical perspective for about 5 years. But I also, couldn't come here without being provocative as well. So I'd say also on just as a concerned citizen, I'm also very, very focused, like most people are, on just how far the data and attention economy has gone, and some of the challenges. Eva, you spoke about the metaverse. We've already seen the problems of voluntary data in social media. We're now moving to a stage of involuntary data. What happens when you've got a headset on your face and all of a sudden social media companies are moving down your brainstem? That is terrifying, right? So we need to move the data away from the application and back to the individual into personal data stores. And so I believe that there's a technological solution that's I'd say all the chess pieces are out there. We're not quite there yet, but the pieces are out there. There's obviously very important policy and governance around data. But my provocative point that we can discuss later, I want to add a new one. We really need to make data a liability to these companies, and not just from a policy perspective, but from a revenue perspective, from a taxation perspective. And I've got some interesting ideas there because we need to accelerate these challenges and solutions.
I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. And now I think we have online my dear colleague Romana Jerkovic. She is the rapporteur on identity, on eIDAS. And if she's with us, if not, I will go to the next speaker. But if she's with us, I would have to say that she's the rapporteur. She's coming from the Committee of Industry, Research and Energy and Environment and Public Health. She's herself was a professor at the Faculty of Medicine in the university and member of the Croatian Parliament, and holds a Doctor of Medicine degree and a PhD in biomedical sciences. So I think also it's realized since he's working on the identity, how important it is for our health data to be able to have control of such an identity. So imagine when you have your wallet, online wallet, on an application that you can choose your card for miles to spend if you fly. Then you have an identity just to access events, maybe an identity to access the European Parliament, an identity for hospitals, an identity to fly cross-border, an identity to use on the boats inside your member state. So several identities, an identity connected to your credit cards, maybe not all, to your tax reports. So multiple identities that you can use instead of using one, and you don't have every time to verify yourself. And they can also have a biometric solution. I don't know if Romana is here, so I'm giving her some time to connect. So if she's here, she can speak, or you can inform me that. So I don't know if she's connected. Okay, so we are waiting, and then I can also prepare you for Thomas Loninger, who will speak immediately after by just saying that he's a member of the board for the European digital rights. Very active. We work together on the targeted advertisements. When the social media, they want to take your attention and they profile you, they know what you're interested in: agriculture, Netflix, blockchain, AI, specific products, you're looking to buy a bag, or you wanted to travel to Mexico. So all these things, they profile you, and then platforms can target you. And this is a business model that gives them a lot of profit because of the clients that they want also to target consumers through the social platforms. So Thomas is an executive director there, and he works in Vienna, Austria, and is the vice president of the European Digital Rights Center, and also from the Center of Society of the Stanford Law School. He's a non-residential fellow, worked in Brussels as a policy advisor, so he understands how we work, and this is why we managed to be in good collaboration on several different topics, because privacy is basically the cornerstone for the digital transformation, and he has a background in IT and social anthropology. So this gives him a great and broad perspective. So if we don't have Romana, I can have Thomas, and then we can go to Romana the moment she's back on. Okay.
Hey,
Excellent.
thank you very much.
Great honor to have you, Thomas.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can hear me. It's a great honor to address this chamber on this very important issue. And thank you for the introduction. I'm not just speaking for my own organization in Austria, but also as vice president for the whole Association for European Digital Rights, so 45 digital rights and privacy organizations throughout the European Union. And let me start by saying that we could all be on the same page here, on the same side, because I truly believe that for this proposal to be successful, we actually need to collaborate from the side of the data protection advocates and industry, because ultimately the eIDAS system that we are currently crafting here can only be successful with enough take-up from citizens. And for exactly this take-up from citizens, it is required, in our opinion, that we introduce safeguards that are currently lacking in the Commission's proposal. It is vital that there are safeguards that truly ensure that the user is in control about their data. And this user trust is really something that we cannot prescribe by law, but for technology, trust needs to be always earned by the technology behaving reliably in the way the user expected to. And let me start with the most obvious point: abuse. There will be relying parties that act in bad faith. Currently, the proposal has nothing in it that would allow a relying party to be excluded. And I think we need to really look carefully at the tools that we need to give to member states and to other regulatory agencies to actually ensure this is a trustworthy environment where we can also act in case there are bad actors. And for example, the penalties for violating the current 2014 eIDAS regulation vary greatly between millions of euros and a few thousands of euros. And if we want to prevent forum shopping and not invite it, then we need to ensure a harmonized application of the regulation throughout the Union. And trust of users means also other things. For example, not being tracked in their user behavior. So for us, that means many technical things in terms of pair-VASP pseudonymity, that whenever I interact with one relying party, no other relying party and no provider of attributes, and particularly no issuer of the wallet, can observe my user behavior. I share my information with that particular relying party, and that does not mean that I want other third parties to obtain knowledge about that transaction. And for us, not being tracked also means that there shouldn't be unique lifelong identifiers as currently envisioned in Article 11a of the proposal. This is not just illegal in the Netherlands, it would be unconstitutional in Germany. And so I believe that we need to find better solutions for identity matching than just tattooing a QR code on the backs of everybody's neck. So we really need to find a way that makes this system trustworthy for users, and a unique lifelong identifier is just contradicting the language of the regulation if that were to pass. And most importantly, the issue of Article 45, the qualified web authentication, that is really a big question because it would allow the web security that we know and depend on today to truly be broken. We had a huge fight in the last decade about the data retention directive. And this decade probably will be a discussion about indiscriminate mass surveillance on a different scale. The CESAM regulation is on everybody's mind and will certainly also be discussed in these chambers in the coming months and years. But nobody really wants to mix the issue of electronic identity together with mass surveillance. Right now, Article 45 would do that. And that's why we would argue to delete Article 45 or at least separate the system in which we ensure that our communication is confidential from the ownership of domain names. And a last point in that line of the trust of users is also what are the bases for a relying party actually being accepted to play in that system. I think the French Council presidency has done important first steps in that regard, with obliging relying parties to register themselves before they are allowed to ask a user for information, and to also limit the amount of information that they can ask a user for by the registration that a member state has given them. But we should also truly scrutinize whether those different use cases, and we are talking about a general purpose infrastructure with the European Digital Identity Wallet. It will be a ubiquitous infrastructure that we'll use for our COVID certificates, our university diplomas, our driving licenses, and so forth. So do we really want government-issued identity information to be handed out purely on commercial considerations, purely because it's in the terms of services a user wants to use? The 800-pound gorilla was mentioned. There are so many situations where, although it might be based on a commercial contract to identify a user, really using the most precious thing that a government holds, the identity of its citizens, and handing it out purely because there is a terms of service that gives the company the right to do so. I don't think that this is the right way to go. We should limit really identity information to those use cases where there is a legal know your customer requirement in place. And lastly, and I'm going to close at that, I want to highlight that there are people not in this room and sadly also not in this debate that should be first row when we talk about this. And these are our senior citizens. These are people who don't have the means to even obtain a smartphone or lack the digital literacy to operate the wallet on a smartphone safely. I come from a country where using government services without electronic identity means is already 30% more expensive. So analog options still need to be in place, at least for a foreseeable future, because we demographically just have so many people in our societies that no matter how good this system is, simply don't have the means or the education or the digital literacy because of their age to operate it safely. And we should ensure that we don't leave those citizens behind, and therefore a non-discrimination provision that prevents any hindrance to those people to access government services, access to the labor market and goods and services, might they not be able to use the wallet, I think would be a really good final step to ensure the trust of citizens is well deserved in the end. And I'm going to close at that and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Thomas. So that's a difficult matrix for Romana to solve, who is with us, my great colleague. And
Hello.
because indeed we have, I mean, to decide if we have a European identity, how to respond to all these challenges, who can use what. Great solutions, but great challenges. And Romana, the floor is yours. Where do you see this revision leading us?
Thank you, Eva. Thank you for hosting today's discussion on digital identity. I hope you hear me well, because I'm not in the ideal. Yeah, you do. Thanks. Great. So, as the Parliament's rapporteur on digital identity, I welcome any initiative that can help raise awareness on this very important topic, which is still very much evolving, but whose impact on the daily lives of our citizens will be far-reaching. When I say far-reaching, I mean that the new framework on digital identity can become a force for good, a new European success story, and a tool for a deeper integration of Europe and the digital single market. This proposal presents Europe with a unique opportunity to become a global leader in the field of digital identity if we everything do in a proper way, by creating a framework that places people and their rights as its center, supports solidarity and inclusion, ensures the freedom of choice online, and so on. In my draft report, which I submitted this Tuesday, and which should be made public this week, I have focused on the four areas: cybersecurity, governance, data protection, and digitalization of public services. And allow me briefly to expand on each of those four areas. On cybersecurity, in order to achieve a high level of security and trustworthiness, this regulation establishes that the wallet will be certified at the cybersecurity certification level high. And the level high is justified here because the wallet will store in one place a set of critical data, such as identity data, diploma, driving licenses, financial statements, and so on. So storing just one type of these data would already justify a high level of protection, but having them stored together in one place makes it even more crucial to protect the wallet. Thus, cybersecurity certification of the wallet shall be performed at level high. I also propose an explicit requirement for the design of the wallet to introduce cybersecurity by design, meaning that the wallet should be designed with the goal of preventing a cybersecurity breach rather than repairing the problem once it occurs. On governance, because establishing a harmonized EU framework for digital identity is extremely sensitive and complex, it demands coordination at the highest European level. That is why I introduced a completely new chapter on governance, and I propose establishment of the European Digital Identity Board, which will be tasked with assisting the Commission in the preparation of legislative proposals and policy initiatives in the field of the digital identity. It would also help facilitate cooperation between the competent national authorities and the Commission, detect and solve problems, become a platform for sharing the best practices, and so on. On data protection, since we are dealing with the most sensitive personal data, data protection lies at the core of this proposal, and having oversight over the relying parties, their use cases of the wallet and the attributes they request from the users is one of the most sensitive aspect of this proposal from the aspect of the protection of personal data. And here I'm quite in line with the Thomas and everything that he previously said. I introduced a requirement for the relying parties to notify competent national authorities about the intended use of the wallet, as well as obligation for relying parties to authenticate themselves to the user before any form of authentication can take place. Finally, on digitalization of public service, well, digitalization of national administration and public services will be very important aspect of this proposal. And the quality, the access, the transparency of the public services through digitalization should be improved and modernized across the EU. Once the regulation goes into effect, I believe that the digital wallet will become one of the key enablers of the digital transition of e-government and help ensure seamless access to public services. To this end, this regulation should support the use of the once only principle in order to reduce administrative burden, to support cross-border mobility of citizens and businesses too, and to foster development of interoperable e-government services across the European Union. So in conclusion, it all comes down to people and values. We need to shape a digital future that works for all of us by putting people first and, of course, empowering them. We should also keep in mind that technology should never become a goal in itself, but rather a tool for advancing our societies towards a more just, more inclusive and sustainable future. So I wish you, Eva, a good continuation of the discussion.
Thank you, Romana Jerkovic, for your work and very interesting points, 4 points, and I can definitely think of several uses that we will achieve if we achieve what you already suggested. And Alexandros Spiridonos, Dr. Spiridonos, is an attorney at law and co-founder of ELONtech, and he has been actually an author of several books and regular writer and contributor of studies and academic publications on several topics that are of great importance. How to set up a company, for example, in the tourism sector, how Airbnb is using, it has like new challenges. You're becoming a person who is an owner of a service if you enter such a platform. And already I know his interest was to set up a possibility of having a European company instead of having different companies. How can you establish 27 different ones instead of just one in Europe? That would actually create a perfect sandbox for companies to feel that Europe is one single market. And he's a member of Scientific Commission of Law Review on Technology and Communication for Commercial and Financial Law, and for arbitration and civil procedure. So I think besides that, also for charitable foundation, Lilian Buduri. So I understand that he's covering a lot of interesting aspects, and I think himself, again, with such an idea of having a European possibility of an identity and then a company and then a business, it opens up to these opportunities for the industry, for the public sector, for a guarantee of safety and more legal certainty in any case. So I'd give him the floor, and he will also have a very interesting discussion to follow.
Thank you very much, Eva. And you forgot the most important things, that we are working together in order to produce some very interesting amendments to sensitive issues of the digital society that is coming before us. And the most important question from what I heard so far is if we really have put in the regulation, in the amendment regulation, the safeguards, the legal safeguards that we need to have in order to be sure that this digital identity will actually work for the people and in favor of citizens. Because from what I have learned for studying carefully the provisions of the suggested amendment is that the ID, digital European wallet, can be set up by a private company if the member state wants it to be so. Then it can be certified by a private body, a private institution as well. And finally, it can be used by private institutions. So I am going to raise a question to the panel. If this is actually something deriving from the traditional idea of the state, because the state, as we know, is providing the identity, to a person and is recognizing a person to be a citizen. On the other hand, the state is providing the identity card in the jurisdictions that an identity card is obligatory. There are certain jurisdictions where the identity card is not obligatory as a specific document, but there are other means to prove, other ways to prove your identity. So in this discussion and in the regulation, I can see from a legal point of view and from a practical point of view that there is a combination, there is a mix-up of different things, of three different things. The first thing is the identity. The identity as a legal sense is the legal bond between the person and a specific state. So this identity is not touched by this regulation. It is not the object of this regulation, and it should not be the object of this regulation. So it is not a matter, or it should not be a matter of our discussion. The second one is the digital identity. The digital identity is something that has not been correctly defined so far. We have many different aspects to define what we mean by digital identity. A digital identity is the identity we have, for example, if we want to get into the tax system and to communicate to the tax authority. A digital identity is the identity we have when we communicate to our bank. It is our banking digital identity. Digital identity is the identity we have when we enter the Facebook, for example, or the Meta Facebook. In any case, it is a different digital identity we have. So this is the second sense of the meaning. And the third meaning is what we mean by the recognition of this identity. The identification and the authentication that when somebody says digitally that he is who or she is who he says or she says he is actually or she is actually that. So this is a third issue. And we mix all these three issues. So maybe we should ask ourselves if we have separated enough these terms, because what Daniel asked before, yes, of course, even the physical identity card can be stolen, can be forged. So this is not the reason if we say that the digital identity can be forged, that it is not enough reason to say that we deny progress, because we need to have digital, we need to have a presence in the digital world. So it would be stupid for us, first of all, and for our citizens to deny this digital participation in the digital world, because it will make lives better. So we have to separate the digital identity in the sense of reflection of the traditional identity as the bond of the citizen and the state from the use of services and goods in the digital world. So maybe we could say to ourselves that we could separate and give to each citizen of all 27 European member states a digital identity which would be the equivalent in the digital world to the traditional identity card that we have to enter, for example, in here. And then we start looking how we connect ourselves to the digital world. And this first thing has to be given only by the state, because giving an identity is actually a power of the state. So it is the recognition of the state. Of course, we have the several questions when we are talking about crypto assets and things like that, but that's another story and another discussion and another panel. So this is my first remark. The second remark is that we have to take care, because we are talking here, because we are in Europe, and we are glad to be in Europe. I'm talking here about how we use our digital identity and how we make it safe and things like that. But if we see the world as a whole, we have to see that there are about 1.1 billion people who do not have an identity and who cannot prove who they are, and this means that they are deprived of the possibility to enter several services or even the possibility to be helped. So there are programs in the world outside us, there are programs which aim at bringing identity to 1.1 billion people. And this, of course, reflects to the immigration problem, because when somebody enters Europe, as you may know, he might be 14 years old from Syria, he might be 18 years old from Afghanistan, but he is what he declares that he is, because he has not any kind of proof of identity and he cannot declare his rights. So this is a second issue that we have to take care of. And the third issue that we have also to discuss about is that maybe in this digital world and in this digital discussion, we have forgotten to separate the needs of natural persons and the needs of enterprises. As Eva said before about the European company, the idea is to provide, to propose, to suggest a new means which would be a European digital company, which would actually be very well set up, very cheap set up, very immediately set up, and would provide for infrastructure for everyone. Because as it was said before, it is one thing to say that everyone has a digital identity, and the second thing is to say how we guarantee, and we have to do that because here we are in order to provide for citizens' rights and for citizens' well-being, how we provide that everybody has at least the right, but not only the right, but the actual possibility to enter the digital world with his or her digital identity and be really part of these services. So it is very, very important to make sure that all European citizens, when they are given their digital identity, we have a program or we produce a program whereby they will have at least some kind of a possibility to actually in rural areas or in distant areas or in poor areas to be able to use these services and be part of this new digital world, because it is in our hands to make the digital world better than the real one, because we have not achieved equality in the real world. So maybe we try to do it in the digital world. So that's my opening remark to the discussion.
No, you clarified a lot of things, and I think this is extremely important. And I think this triggers the discussion. But before that, we have with us Nicolas Moes and Nacho Alamilo. I have to present them because with Nicolas, we work with the Future Society, especially on artificial intelligence. And he's an economist, but AI is like cruise sector, so it's everywhere. And you need people that they understand the verticals, like the law, the economy of it, and the technology, and also the policy challenges. So you need everybody to be on board. And he's based in Brussels himself, and he's worked a lot on responsible AI and global governance. So I think it's very important that we have him with us. And I will say also that Dr. Ignacio Alamilo Domingo is a doctor in law with a PhD thesis related to the eIDAS. So especially what we are trying to succeed in Europe, and he holds several certifications in technological practice himself on digital identity, blockchain standardization, 100 of publications. So I think you and Alexandros can compete very well. How many publications you had, I would lose. And now I think I give the floor to Nicolas, then to Nacho, and that maybe we can have prepare your questions and at any point ask a question, because this could make it like more lively, as it's so interesting to consider how you develop your identity if you add more data in it and what should be allowed to happen. Because if you add like data like a health pass, then maybe things that the public should allow you to have and services would be removed in the same time. So we need to be very careful on what extent we're going to have an identity solution. So, Nicholas.
So much, Eva. Thank you so much, ELONtech, as well, for organizing this event. That's really nice. I'm happy to be here and to be discussing these important issues with all of you. As you said, Eva, I think we have to be careful, right? So this is something like at the Future Society. This is a think tank where I work at. I'm a policy researcher over there, and therefore, what I look is like how to make governance better, right? So we want better governance for digital technologies in this case. And when looking at the eID questions, right, it is actually something that I find it's a tricky one to nail. So really, best of luck to all the experts working on this, because there are 4 hurdles that I will list here. There are many more, of course, but like there are 4 that, from the economic standpoint, come up mostly. These 4 hurdles: that the political economy, the governance or the rollout of these eID services, the public trust that has already been mentioned in the past, and then the more philosophical / policy strategy questions that we should ask ourselves and to make sure that we get. So I'll be brief, because I also want to have a Q&A and to hear your input, all of you, right? This is part of the policy making process, should be really to get to answer the questions and to get also the comments from everyone. So I'm looking forward to that. But like on the first point of political economy, right? So quickly, just mentioning that a couple of years ago, I was doing research that requested me to access Belgian legislation. This is something that was fairly typical. In most countries, you have a website where there is like the PDF of the legislation that's available. Here in Belgium, for some reason, like you needed to have an account with Microsoft. You had an Outlook account to access the.
For some reason.
For some reasons, right? And I don't know if it was due to incompetence or just to like a decision that was made for privacy reasons, or like for securing the for cybersecurity reasons.
It's for Anders, not for me.
So this is the kind of that's a bit cringe, right? Of course, when you want to access one of the most important documents of your nation, to actually like notice that you have to just like register with Outlook. So this is something that it has been mentioned before as well in terms of political economy. If this is not governed, if there is not an EU solution put forward that can leverage market forces are great, but so long as they are channeled the right way. If this is not channeled the right way, we will have like industry capture in all their services and abuse, most likely, because this is market forces at play, right? And yeah, I think there is some work to do on to nail that one. And unfortunately, I'm bringing up obstacles. I'm not bringing up answers to it. The second point is about the implementation and the rollout. I'm also, in addition to being a Belgian citizen who has an eID system now, I have also an Estonian e-residency. So this is not exactly the same concept, but like this is something that is quite similar. And just would want to mention that an important factor for success will be the ability to make it like, work. There's been plenty over the past 5 to 10 years. There's been plenty of like hiccups on the Belgian side, and like a certain complexity with in terms of user friendliness. This is not really good. While on the Estonian side, there is a bit of there is, for example, a customer service that you can just call up at any time, and like that will fix the issues with you on the phone. This is the kind of thing that is even better than most private sector solutions. Unfortunately, I've been in touch with many customer services of big tech companies, and this is definitely not. They are not on par with it seems, the Estonian customer services. So it doesn't mean that it has to be perfect, but that means that when there is an issue, a technical issue, like at least there is like a robustness mechanism, a sense of like a way for the user to quickly resolve the issue. The third point, and we will hear more about this for the policy people here. Like we will hear more about this in September when the toolbox that are presented by the member state. We'll see a bit what's in there, right? So the third hurdle, as I mentioned, will be like the public trust. I think like regardless of quality, regardless of like the quality of the service, which is just an anecdote, right? We have quality for everything. regardless of the quality, regardless of the industry capture or not, it will be very important to get the citizens to actually trust this. It might be very easy for us. It's definitely very easy for me. I am white. I am male. I have a master's degree, so that's very easy for me to be confident into sharing my data. I've never had to tick the prefer not to say box on any type of form because I'm actually fine with sharing my data. But like we have to put ourselves in the shoes of people who have a certain distrust or misunderstanding of government, people who have a certain distrust and misunderstanding of technologies, people who have perhaps like a bad experience of being discriminated against systematically. And that is something that I fear is always the trickiest part in policy making. And unfortunately, if we don't nail this one right, politically, this could lead to further division and further distrust about like the feeling, yeah, of course, like big brother type of questions. And even though like this policy is made with the best intentions, unfortunately, like intentions are misperceived by a significant minority of the public. So in terms of public trust, that would be something that would be a lot of communications would need to be done about this in order to make sure that this does not backfire into being perceived as a tool of oppression. It should be a tool of empowerment, not seen as a tool of oppression. And finally, maybe something deeper. Well, even if you have nailed, let's say you have avoided industry capture, you have ensured like quality of the rollout, and you have even had public trust. Like a fourth point is like making sure that you have the checks and balances on such it's a powerful tool, right? It's something that will define the digital decade and beyond, right? This is something that will be very important. The fourth point is to make sure that like, as a tool, you should not assume that the European Commission, the European governments and the member states governments will remain the same. Like in 20 years, who knows what can happen, and like in terms of abuse, and we might have like some issues with like populism that would rise, or like the conflict in Ukraine that we see right now shows how quickly things can change in a country or in a region, right? This is something like we would want to make sure that there are the checks and balances, so that like we ask ourselves for like, to make sure that this is trustworthy, not only now, but also like, would we trust ourselves with these tools in the future? So we need to build the checks and balances that makes us answer, yes, I trust that regardless of how bad the next elections can turn out, how bad the populism and like sometimes like, populist movement and fascist movements can rise in the next 40 or 50 years, we will actually trust ourselves with this technology at the government level. So these are the 4 hurdles. And I mean, I'm looking forward to hear the Q&A from that, and of course to hear your final thoughts on this as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. So I will give the floor to Dr. Nacio Alamilo to present his positions and ideas.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the invitation. It is a pleasure and honor, and I'm really loved of the proposal, although I see many potential problems that I want to stress. Many things have already been said, but I want to stress some specific points. First of all, there is always a kind of mixture when we talk about the identity, because it is depending on the people pronouncing identity, it means a thing or another thing. In fact, it has been described before. In the standardization world, we talk about foundational identities when we are thinking more in legal identities, so name, surname, which is, of course, a public potestas of the state. It is a public good, even. You can see the UN Sustainable Development Goal of providing all humans with a legal identity, because there are more than 1 billion people with no identity at all in this planet. So in this sense, when I look at the eIDAS, I can see a connection with foundational identity, but it has, as it has been correctly pointed out, this regulation is not about legal identity. Legal identity is, in my opinion, something for which the European Union has no competence at all. So that means that this digital identity thing is built upon legal identity or upon any other type of digital identity. So this is something that you can see in the regulation. It has 2 different parts. The part regarding wallets is public law. The part regarding everything else, including the other identities, which we call contextual identities, is private law somehow, because we have privatized this. So this is important to keep in mind, because we still have a lot of public authorities, issuing certifying acts that maybe will be requested to become service providers, which is something interesting in terms of privatization of public services. This is very important from the perspective of public law. So you need to differentiate between foundational identity versus identity. And in fact, contextual identity is the rest of our identity data. For instance, the fact that I am a lawyer, or the fact that I hold a degree or whatever, this is something which is contextual. It is not my foundational identity, it's something which is related to me. So my personal identification data, which is the most closely definition we have in the eIDAS regulation, by the way, to what a foundational identity would be, is clearly different, and it is a big business. And in fact, we have created a world which is driven by surveillance capitalism. And in fact, the new evolution of identity systems, of user control or user-centric or self-sovereign identity systems, are precisely dealing with the problem of surveillance capitalism in the United States, where you know that they are creating this concept of consumer privacy, which is completely different from our concept of in the GDPR. And we are reacting in front of that. So instead of having our life, our digital life, with all the attributes we generate, all the identity contextual attributes we generate in our digital life, in a provider's big database in form of a graph, which is then monetized, which is, by the way, what all social network providers do, and now all platform providers do, we want to give back the control of this data to the user. So when you think about identity, you need to understand that what we really want to achieve is the decentralization of identity, and particularly the decentralization of the contextual identities, meaning that instead of having my graph of personal data on Facebook, I have my graph of personal data on a device under my control. This is the essence of what is called self-sovereign identity. Of course, there are a set of principles, because SSI, self-sovereign identity, is a philosophical movement somehow, that should be fulfilled by any solution. And this is really, really in the light of the proposed regulation, because in my view, the proposed regulation is not really addressing properly all these requirements, all these principles. So to start with, an SSI system should ensure my right to exist on the internet, even if I am not registered by anyone. This is in fact the most important property, to exist. And this is why SSI was even birthed in the world of blockchains. Because blockchains are decentralized distributed registries that would allow me to create my identifier, my user account, which normally is an email address, without depending on anyone. And that means anyone, even a state. So in this sense, pure SSI is a nice figure because it will allow me to exist and then to be registered. So first to exist and then to be identified and be given name, surname, and an ID number credential, or to be given my law degree credential under my control. This is the purest approach for SSI. Of course, there are other things. Control, selective disclosure, the ability to delete data, and the ability to persist and to port the data when I want to have the data under my control as well. So in this sense, the eIDAS approach is nice because it has a lot of these properties, but it does not support all the properties. For instance, the existence property, the existence philosophical principle of SSI is not covered by the regulation. On the contrary, the regulation has created something which is good. I mean, I'm not against it, which is a kind of eIDAS SSI, state-based SSI. So the idea is that I have first my foundational identity, which is the case of Spain, my national ID card, and then with this I can create a voluntary derived identity, which is called personal identification data, under the control of the state, who provides me with a wallet. And with this wallet, I have my first digital identity, something for which we don't have a definition, it has been correctly said, and then I can get other identities, other identity data in form of credentials. So as it was shown this very week in the EPSI demo day, I will be able to use my wallet, which has been derived from my national ID card, to request a diploma credential and to show this to third parties. And this is nice because it considers foundational identity as the basis of the system, but of course it puts all the power on the hands of the member states. And I am not necessarily against this, because an SSI anchored in public authority will provide higher level of assurance. So at the end of the day, a wallet is an application which is in a mobile phone, and someone should ensure me that this is working properly. That's already been said before. But of course, because the wallet is provided by the member state and the member state can decide any strategy to provide the wallet, my real possibility of exist on the internet only depends on a member state. And I'm deeply worried about the possibility of member states using administrative measures to censorship users. This is something that could happen. Probably I would like to see in the regulation the adoption of strict measures to protect the citizens. For instance, what about requiring strict judicial control to cancel a wallet? Is a wallet revocable? I mean, it is, of course. Yeah. This type of wallet is revocable. But there are other things. If we require all relying parties to be identified and to define what they intend to do with the wallet, if we create a super big registry of anyone using our wallet with the purposes, aren't we creating the most powerful surveillance infrastructure ever in the European Union? There are people thinking so. And there are people saying that we should not allow this. And probably they are right in some sense. When I show my national ID card, the Spanish police doesn't know who I'm talking to. They don't know who are seeing my national ID card. And that's fine. Otherwise, I don't have any privacy at all. So depending on the technological approach, we could create a state surveillance model. And this is highly undesirable. And ironically, we are being criticized by this in other countries. I'm saying this in ISO, and our Chinese colleagues are starting to say, we are going to learn many things from you. This is a small joke, but it is not that small joke, because at the end of the day, it is true that if we do not implement this properly, because properly implemented, it is very good, it could generate a lot of problems. But, how do we solve this? Well, probably we could prohibit centralized wallet provision. This is one possibility. So what about if instead of allowing member states to provide and to select any strategy, we put controls? Or what happens if, why do not, for instance, impose other additional controls? For instance, allowing private companies to sell wallets, competing among them, instead of reserving this activity into the state. There are a lot of examples in the European Union where we have private companies acting on behalf of states, competing among them, and this could be one case. So distributed and decentralized wallet management could solve many problems. I'm not saying that we should privatize this. I'm saying that it should work under this control. And finally, we have, just a minute, please. We have some problems with competition law. Why are you talking about competition law? Because you know that wallets are free to use by citizens, but we can charge to relying parties for the use of wallets. If we do that, we can create big competition tensions, specifically if member states decide to have appointed and preferred providers, then we decide, we impose obligations to relying parties. So this is a set of potential risks that we could avoid by putting more decentralization and, for instance, by adopting models such as EVSI. EVSI is based on blockchains, is based on distribution. I'm not saying that this is the best solution from a technological perspective, but it solves a lot of issues. Of course, eIDAS should be modified, at least at the proposal level, to adopt this approach. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It was very interesting, and the distinction between private and public law, of course. And maybe we could enter now our question and answers part. So if anyone wants to ask a question, do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, please, Gail. Is there a button there? Can you take this?
On the right side.
Too much technology for my taste. How about what are the implications of the proliferation of biometrics as a means of identity verification in all your contexts?
I think this is a question for Anders to answer first, and then maybe Josh from another perspective. Please.
Yeah, I think you know, the concept of biometrics is a sensitive one.
Definitely.
And definitely. So in terms of the regulation, biometrics is seen as, say, one way to authenticate a user on a certain level of assurance. It does not address, because it falls currently, say, under the way in which member states deal with identity verification and identity proof. And we'll have to see to which extent, I think, biometrics as a means to authenticate, as one of several means to authenticate, how it will feature within the new technical framework of the European.
We have the 12 months.
Within the European Digital
period.
Identity Wallet. As it is currently constructed, it's an element of the Implementing Act, which sets out the different requirements on, depending on your level of assurance related to nationally issued EID means. And as part of the discussion and, let's say, the implementation of the requirements set out in the regulation, one has to then see how to deal with biometrics in terms of a means for authentication, and how to deal with it in terms of. But clearly, I think I wanted to underline also one aspect here, that is that the eIDAS regulation is a functional tool. Sets out high-level functional requirements related to things like security, trust, who issues the wallet, and so on. But it's technologically neutral in the sense that it doesn't take stance on how we implement. So I think many of the comments that have been raised by the panelists deal with, so how do we then ensure a high level of trust in reality, so not only on the level of principle, when implemented. And there, of course, the Commission works with all the institutions and member states, now more specifically under what was referred to as a toolbox process, to sort of see how, in reality, is it possible to implement these requirements in technical terms. Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Anders. And Josh, you want to comment on that?
No, I was just going to say that, you know, as a means to authenticate, you know, biometrics is a password you can never change, and is readable by just about anybody that has access. So I think from a technical perspective, it gets back to the point of keeping any of this type of data local and in the power of the individual. For instance, biometrics can be a very good way to wrap like a private key that's held within a secure enclave chip on a phone. So you know locally only you can access that key to sign something on the internet, but that biometrics all happens local in your, you know, in your data control. So it's always, you know, separating that. So using it can be very, very beneficial to the user, but it always needs to be thought about in the user's framework rather than, using it to authenticate as a password you can never change. Great point.
There is also the geodata issue, of course, which goes along with the use of the wallet. But any other questions? Yes, please. The other side?
Next to the mic, right side.
Sorry?
Thank you. Thank you for hosting this event, Ms. Kaili, and being a member of one of the co-organizers. Thank you, speakers, for being with us and sharing these thoughts. I noted down many points. I noted strong words, a society, existence, participation, voluntary participation to the society, competition, and anything dystopian coming from all the problematic that all of you addressed. I have these thoughts that I would like to share with you and ask your opinion on it. I think I'm one of the last, my generation, one of the last that we remember as teenagers going to the public service office to certify our existence and have a national identity on paper. And we felt secure because we had no doubt that the old man with the power of his signature and the power of the stamp, he certified our existence and who we are. The next thought is that my son, I will have to register him on in order to have his health book online. I have to register him on a platform that whose administrator I do not know, I cannot see, and I have to trust that. And I have no guarantee of what the use of this data for my son, who's a newborn, let's say, what the management of this data will be like in 20 or 30 years from now. And I don't know if you know, it's Mount Athos in Greece. It's a holy mountain. It used to belong to the goddess Diana. Now it's only resident by men who decide to go there to leave society and dedicate themselves to God. So I was wondering, they can change their name, they get a new identity, a new passport. They do not belong to the what is our society, but they can have access to whatever they need, not vice versa. So I was wondering if we will have the right to opt out, and will a citizen continue to have the privilege, because these people on this mountain are quite privileged. Will we have the privilege of not becoming digital citizens? Will we still be respected, have access to all the public services and all our rights? Will there be a constitution for the digital citizens and the citizens as we know them up to now? And how the perception is changing of participating to democracy in the society? I would like to hear your opinion.
I will give the floor to Anders to answer, but I want to add, will the wallet contain potentially in the future our votes, if we want to vote distantly, and if this would be a way so that everybody will participate in democracy, or a way that everybody will be traced what he vote or she votes.
And responsible for what you vote.
And responsible for what you vote. And do you have liability? And the second question, to give a package to Anders, by definition, he's going to answer all these, is whether we consider that participants, users of a social network are data and include data there, and they are a commodity actually. Will this commodity have to be taxed, and use these taxes in a way to put forward all people who are deprived of inclusivity in the digital world, to give them a means to participate in the digital world, so that they will not look at the digital world from their distant area? You have 1 minute.
Okay. I like the 1 minute format, so thank you very much.
Of
no,
course,
I mean,
you are free not to stick to
respect
1
that,
minute.
yes. No, I mean, clearly, what the Commission has put forth, and I think it's kind of well, less near to self-evident in the sense that the European Digital Identity Wallet is provided as a tool for citizens to exercise rights. So it is not a tool that is obligatory. In fact, it's clearly stated in the proposal that it's free for the user to get such a means to identify and to use such a means to identify. It does not exclude alternative ways provided to have access to services. It does not exclude alternative ways to provide a vote. In fact, the eIDAS framework does not at all, in fact, say anything about when you have an identity that is secure and trustworthy and clearly proves your identity, that it has to be used in, let's say, for the purpose of voting, for the purpose of this and that. What it says is that within certain contexts for authentication, for the access to online public services, you have a right to use it. On the second question, I think on taxation with regards to sort of somehow balance out an issue with you know, non-participation and so on. I think I will pass on this one. It's
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So I think we are reaching an end. Yeah, of course. Please, Josh.
So this isn't from a government perspective, but I guess one idea I wanted to introduce to take on not necessarily the 800-pound gorilla, but the 7 trillion pound gorilla of the data economy is looking at their, again, this data as a liability. And we're seeing that in policy. We're seeing that in, you know, right to be forgotten and things that they have to do with data. But that's still very, very hard to monitor. But, you know, if you look up, and I'm sorry to pick on Facebook or Meta, but, you know, even within the first 3 slides of their investor presentation, they have total users, value per user, and then effective tax rate. They just put it right at it. You know, very, very simple. It didn't have to go very far. So Facebook makes, or Meta makes about $30 per user per year. And their effective global tax rate is 16%. And so what they're telling their investors, because the whole user acquisition lifetime value of a customer, the business model is they acquire users, of course, and then use that data to sell advertising. But they're not paying per user in every jurisdiction, right? And beyond that, you know, if you look at the 16% effective tax rate versus, look, I'm a mining engineer, so in a resource economy, probably paying somewhere around 45% effective tax between the top line revenue royalties and then all the different, you know, taxes throughout a resource extraction. Well, what are these companies doing? They're extracting probably the most valuable resource that every country has, and that's the attention and creativity of its users, of the intellectual property and content of its users, and they're paying 16% tax. I think, like the resource industry, you can balance the incentives of these companies by charging them a per user royalty, not an income tax based on advertising sales in, I don't know, Ireland or something, but actual, you know, user in a jurisdiction. So not only is it an interesting tax policy, but what it can do is it can jumpstart moving self-sovereign identity into the world by allowing people to verify who they are without the company taking that information. Right, so you authenticate that I do live in this jurisdiction, but you actually don't give any underlying information to the platforms. So that may be a way to really, you know, fight in 2 different ways. So I know there's a lot of things to flesh out, and probably at heart, I probably am more of a libertarian. So introducing another tax, I am an American as a guest here in the EU. But you know, so it needs to be thought through. But I just wanted to introduce that idea. To incentivize not only that now this data is a revenue or it's an actual cost-based liability to these companies to be holding that data. If you're in the data sales business, you got to pay per month, you know, 20 cents. I don't know, pick the number. But then it also changes the incentive on the companies to not be holding that data. And you get self-sovereign identity into the world. So something to think about over time.
I think Eva has say something.
This is an excellent point. And I see here we have notes. So I think it was very interesting to connect how much you evaluate or meta a person. And then you could also give him the option to pay for that so that he's not a product, which is very...
Exactly.
Yeah. This is what I was thinking, less than the identity. Just to say also that next year you're gonna learn about ETIAS. ETIAS is a new system to control our borders, the European borders. So this means the identity will be another layer to build on that, which means whoever enters Europe is like an ESTA for US, like an online visa possibility. So we know when somebody enters or exits Europe, which suddenly, again, is a new form of identification that was really extremely important and was a shortcoming of Europe. Is going to happen. So whoever enters Europe in a legal way, they're going to have to complete an online registration so we know when they exit. I think this is remarkable and necessary under the challenges we face. And then the platforms that we use, and Anders said very smartly that it's an option. So we mentioned in 2019 that we should provide options to citizens. So to be able to switch off, to be able to have alternative solutions, not just Microsoft. I was also upset when I had to like file my citizen card here and I had to go through Microsoft, and I found an alternative anyway. I managed, but they make it quite difficult. So to have other possibilities. And then I was also happy to know that Microsoft is working on blockchain in order to, with a private blockchain and with ensuring privacy, which means they will not be able to read the data. So once we call for that, the infrastructure is there. Nobody can tell us it doesn't exist. So as much privacy as we need, we can have it, even if such big companies are there. So I just want to thank you all. It was like a pleasure to have you. This is an ongoing discussion because it affects everything we do here. I mean, if you're legal online, we say offline, you have to be legal also online. And sometimes the lines are blurry. What if you bully someone online? Should you be like a criminal record registered offline? Maybe you should. So these are like challenges we need to address. It's like a very new, a new world there. And ID is just one thing. Multiple IDs is a new concept we have to understand better. And thank you for your expertise, everybody. And Alexander, Mr. Tusail, Jos, and Anders, thank you so much, because you have the technical responsibility to also deliver what here we have as a political discussion. Nicholas and Mr. Domingo, thank you so much. Madalena, everybody. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. And Andreas should have a final word. Thank you. By the way, I think there is also a dinner that you're free to skip. Enjoy Brussels because it's sunny, not always, but like more recently due to the climate change.
Well, thank you all very much, and on behalf of ELONtech, and we are going to see you in the next more provocative discussion.